Hello and welcome to Career Coaching After Hours. It's your host, John Davidson. Can you believe it already? It's episode 22, and here we are, September 2025. So thank you for joining me. If you're here because you want to hear Career Coaching After Hours and John Davidson rant and rave about career trends, you might be in the right place. So I appreciate you spending some time with me. And I've been looking forward to doing this episode for a few months now because last year I did an entire YouTube presentation on corporate lingo, more from kind of the job seeker's perspective or the human resources perspective, because of course I work with mostly job seekers and folks who are in career change or career pivot mode. And what I have seen, especially the last few years, is almost an inundation with new words, new phraseology, new themes that pop up that try to describe issues people are facing in the trenches of career search, whether that means maybe they're passively looking in their current role or maybe they're actively job searching. So last year I had the extra Riz edition of the Job Seeker's Guide to Corporate Lingo. This year, 2025, it's the extra spicy Riz edition. So I've picked a handful of phrases that I've seen more often this year here in 2025. Some I've seen before. Maybe you've seen them here in the last couple of years. But we have this wonderful English language that seems to be, a bit of a mongrel, and we evolve it on a regular basis. So I thought I'd dive into some terms and take a little bit more of a lighthearted approach. Last episode was really heavy, so again, thank you for joining me and putting up with the series. And I'll go through some of my classic disclaimer slides here, and hopefully you're enjoying the relaxing music as well. But of course, I'm assuming this is audience agnostic to an extent, so if you're one of my clients, thank you very much. If you're not, you've been referred, or maybe you just stumbled onto me here on YouTube, great, I appreciate it. But again, I'm probably not your career coach, so definitely feel free to reach out to a direct professional if you want some guided help and assistance. Most of the work that I do is with individuals one-on-one, so these types of themes pop up. So it seems most folks enjoy the ramblings and ravings that I put out here on YouTube, and they certainly help me process some of the things that I read and some of the issues that I deal with out there in the trenches. As usual, it's to the best of my knowledge, so hopefully I got these definitions correct. There's some citations here on YouTube if you want to do a little bit of extra credit, but we'll dive in, and like I say, check your sources, protect your eyes, ears, and senses, and let's dig on in. The Tactical 2025 Job Seeker's Guide to Corporate Lingo. Here we be. All right. So this is a phrase that I think is relatively new, maybe brand new here in 2025, but this idea of being career catfished. And so what I think is actually really interesting is sometimes where these phrases come from are surveys from human resources professionals. They're on all just terms from psychiatrists or psychologists or linguists. But a new report from Monster suggests a lot of folks, maybe a lot more folks than we realize, read a job description, go on an interview, and then kind of after the fact feel catfished or feel cheated, kind of here after they've done this interview and it's been exhaustive. Then what happens in terms of the actual job description? And I've said this many, many times over the years in various ways that maybe we don't even really know what a job is all about until you're on the job for 30, 60, maybe even 90 days in terms of truly understanding why that job was open and what issues you have to deal with and untangle beyond maybe just the raw job description. So I thought that data was actually pretty darn high. 8 in 10 workers say they've accepted a job that didn't match what was promised. And so this is one of the reasons that I push active interviewing and really owning that interview process if you're a job seeker, to try to understand what you're actually biting off. not just negotiating the offer letter and the terms of it, in terms of the salary or the title and the finer points, but quite literally, what are you biting off? But there's a phrase for that, being career catfished. So be careful out there. And like I say, there are citations here in the YouTube postings. Feel free to check those out afterwards and do the extra credit work. Another one I think is kind of synthesized that, and again, many of these citations are right here from 2025 articles. So I think it's fair to say they belong in the second edition of my guidebook. But this idea of a work nemesis, certainly I think we've all heard of a nemesis at work or a rival at work or something like that. But to kind of encapsulate it as a distinct phrase, I thought was really interesting. And the article is kind of a nice history lesson in terms of the tech industry, for example. So, I mean, classically, I can remember back even in the 80s, 90s, where Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were rivals. You had the Microsoft-Apple rivalry. Nowadays, you've got Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. You've got these really intense, very public sometimes tech rivalries, either fighting over AI talent or fighting over stock prices and who's the richest person in the world, those kind of things. You see different folks go up and down the charts. But it's actually kind of an interesting concept that maybe there's some benefit to having a quote-unquote nemesis or almost a frenemy. I don't recall exactly when I heard that phrase, but that concept that you can have an arch rival, but they don't have to be an actual enemy. So I remember the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson days where you had two incredibly talented athletes, but arguably, steel sharpened steel, and they made each other better without really despising one another, and they actually worked together on the dream team. So there's that piece. Kind of like I think a lot of us smiled when Bill Gates actually helped out Apple and Steve Jobs back in the day. So yeah, hopefully you're not getting into a cage match or a battle here with your frenemy or your work nemesis, but I think there can be some positivity to some of that, as long as it's not a negative relationship, but not an uncommon issue that I deal with. Often this is more of a coworker to coworker thing. A lot of folks hire me because of a goofy boss, to say the least, but we'll move along. And so I thought this next one was really interesting because it derives essentially from the gaming universe, this idea of a main character energy. You're the main character in a video game or an RPG, what have you. But the article out of Marketing Dive, I thought was actually really insightful because Hilton, which I think is a great brand, great chain, really kind of talking about this idea of making the customer or the guest the main character. And sometimes you see this in job descriptions where an organization will describe a role sort of in the context of the mission and the vision and the value statements of the organization to help employees feel like there's a little bit more agency or a little bit more interest in the role and kind of more skin in the game, if you will. So I've heard this phrase, throughout kind of social media, main character energy. It seems like folks use it on dating sites. I'm not really seeing it on LinkedIn, but I surmise there will be more main character energy on LinkedIn, which is ultimately where I spend most of my time on social because I have to. You'd expect a career coach and counselor to do that, I suppose. But I think kind of an interesting idea where there's a theme that could possibly describe how we market to people, how we sell people, how we value individuals, and try to make them feel like they're a part of something bigger. So I don't think this is just marketing psychobabble. I actually kind of like this one here. So maybe we'll be seeing more of that soon, although I don't think I'm going to be putting main character energy on resumes anytime soon. But let's mosey on along to hybrid creep. And I've been writing about this more here the last couple of years, not just Amazon, not just Microsoft, not just Starbucks, but several organizations scooting from maybe 2 or 3 days a week in the office to 3 or 4 or 5, what have you, where the numbers seem to be going up. And so, of course, Starbucks and Microsoft both been in the news here, Pacific Northwest, West Coast, big employers, big Fortune 500s, making some massive changes as to, not, I think this actually maybe ties into the career catfishing concept there, where when I help folks negotiate their offer letters, so often we've got to talk about how many days are actually in the office. Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? Is it 4 tens? And so this is such an important issue as more companies are doing the RTO thing, return to office. It's an acronym I think most of us are pretty familiar with now. But I think this is interesting. So if you look at the Business Insider article, it's a survey of about 2,000 folks where they've been revised. And in virtually all cases, it's tighter, as in that hybrid creep. It used to be maybe 2 or 3 days in the office per week, but now it's 4 kind of thing. It's creeping up, where folks don't really have your standard employees, your average rank and file employees, even leadership management employees don't seem to have a choice in many cases. So we see this scooch happening with very little, much of more than a murmur, essentially. What can you do if your job has suddenly been scooted to 3 or 4 or 5 full days in the office? But certainly this can cause a lot of upheaval, and I very much feel for folks who take on a position with a certain amount of work-life balance, who maybe have to take care of children or elderly parents or others, or pets even, of course, and then suddenly are faced with this hybrid creep concept. And I called out Starbucks a bit earlier this year in terms of really questioning, why are we going back to office when, for example, with Starbucks, why can't we have folks in the restaurants, in the stores directly? And maybe there's not the real benefit to being in the office beyond maybe 3 or 4 days a week. Maybe we should be a little bit more creative. And what do we mean by hybrid creep, and why are we maybe forcing everybody to go back to work, or so many folks? But interesting way of phrasing that, this kind of like scope creep in the realm of project or program management. So worth checking that article out. The next phrase is one that was new to me this year, or if I'd heard of it, I forgot about it. But otrovert, and I think most folks say otrovert or otravert. But so often I talk to clients about assessments, or communication or leadership assessments, or psychometrics like Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder, what have you. Harvard Business Review has a great one that I like. But this concept of maybe we don't all fit into the classic categories of introvert or extrovert, and maybe there is a third category. And so I think this is really interesting. I don't recall studying this back in college level psychology 1.2 million years ago, but after reading through it, it's interesting, as I've been talking to clients, that is it helpful, for example, in a job interview to talk about yourself in terms of introvert, extrovert, or otrovert? And as I've read through it, I have to say I feel like I might actually be one of these people. So again, I've found it very difficult to categorize myself as an introvert or an extrovert. And many folks have said the exact same thing to me. So there's one reason I kind of chide folks for relying too heavily on the Myers, the MBTI, because so often we kind of get nudged or scooched into either or. It's kind of binary, true, false. You're either an introvert or you're an extrovert. It's one of the 16 personality types. But if in fact maybe you're an emotional loner, you kind of pseudonym there for otrovert. But I think kind of interesting, where maybe we're stretching or flexing these ideas of, well, what if I'm insightful, I'm independent, and you care about others, but you don't feel this overwhelming need to belong? And so I get the feeling maybe that the MBTI will be adjusted or revised, perhaps, to have a little bit more flexibility here, as we're seeing more articles like this pop through. So, Autrovert, again, I'm not going to suggest we're going to see a lot of this in resumes and LinkedIn profiles pull forward, but maybe we might actually see some assessments, maybe like the DISC assessment, start to address this a bit more directly in the coming years. Time will tell. All right. And moving on, the coffee cup test. Wow. Now, I'd heard of this before, and I surmise most of you have probably heard of this. I want to say I heard of this maybe 1 or 2 years ago officially, where I believe it was an Australian company, check me on that. It was a CEO that came up with this test, and it caught a little bit of fire, and it seems to have died out, but it seems to now have popped up a little bit more in 2025 as it is, maybe a more, difficult job market, and very frequently is a more difficult job market for many folks, not just here in the United States and not just younger employees or older employees, as some of the writing that I've done has touched on, but pretty tough job market across the board in many different industries and fields where we're seeing maybe more curveball questions or more loops or hoops to jump through in interviews. And so the coffee cup test, this kind of idea that, let's say, for example, in a job interview, an in-person job interview, where you're offered a cup of coffee, should you take that? And then now that you've got this cup of coffee, are you going to offer to put it away or do the dishes kind of thing, assuming it's not a compostable coffee cup kind of situation. So the core idea here is, kind of divides folks, maybe rightly so, as in, should an employer do this? Is this, if we're really testing somebody in an interview, should we be oblique about it? Or should we just be direct? As in, offer somebody a cup of coffee to offer them a cup of coffee and not to trick them or go through this kind of skullduggery of, do they accept the coffee or not? Well, what if they're not a coffee drinker? Well, there you go. I am a coffee drinker, so I'd probably accept, and I usually put my stuff away. So I guess I would pass that test, but maybe something to be aware of, kind of thought process, as in, are there maybe some emotional intelligence markers that we can glean from this? But, in my opinion, this might have limited value, and I think what's kind of interesting is we live in a world where a lot of folks go on interviews, but their references don't really get called or emailed, even if folks are asked for references. So maybe we should ensure we're getting that done and getting the background checks done fairly and accurately and on time, instead of something like this. Especially where if they don't drink coffee, then gosh, what are we going to do? Hold that against them if they're a tea drinker? And I've heard this rumor that some people actually prefer tea, or they just don't drink either. But I think this article is actually not off base at all. I think it does make some good points about going further and cleaning up for yourself and showing some emotional intelligence, respecting others. You could say this is an extension of kind of the receptionist test, quote unquote, where maybe during an interview we need to be extra cautious about how we treat folks, or gosh, maybe we should always be nice to the receptionist when we show up for an interview and nice to everybody in that loop. And you might be surprised who pops up in your interview loop or on your interview panel. And so there you go. But I think a worthy article worth checking out, whether you're a job seeker or maybe if you're a hiring manager, trying to decide if in fact you're going to use a test like this. And then newsflash, remember to consistently use those types of assessments across all of the candidates. So hopefully all the candidates are getting the same core questions and the same fair experience. All right, and so this I think is new or novel to 2025. I don't recall hearing this precise phrase, job hugging, but like I say, of course, you don't need me to tell you that 2025 has just been a roller coaster for folks. We've had federal layoffs, we've had big changes in tech and gaming, and a lot of concerns about AI, and a lot of concerns about how to pay for AI development and deployment and research. And a lot of folks are finding it difficult to compete in the market out there. But this concept of job hugging is arguably just survival. And I actually think this article from Inc. is well worth reading, that maybe really what it is just folks focusing on the task at hand because it's a bit of a tight labor market and tight job market. And maybe what that means for HR is more engagement. So folks are just super focused on keeping their jobs. Are they able to really do their best if they're worried about being let go or being made redundant, kind of thing? And so arguably, if we have higher level of job hugging, maybe we have panic, we have fear, we have less good performance and more maybe kind of performative activity, as in are people at their best when they're worried? And so I very much applaud this article for promoting the concept of stay interviews, which another phrase that I think most folks are probably aware of, but this concept of why not stay on top of our current employees from the perspective of trying to understand, are they a flight risk? Are they happy? Are they supported? And so not just exit interviews when maybe it's too late to keep that employee, and maybe those are of limited value, but a stay interview, or gosh, maybe an annual review with employees, or quarterly reviews, semi-annual reviews, really trying to meet folks where they are and understand what keeps them motivated, and to let employees know that they are in fact valued. Last I checked, for every organization, their most valuable asset really is their people. So onward we go. The final one involves frogs, and I love frogs and toads, of course, who doesn't? And I carefully snipped that image to get the full frog. That is just straight up adorable. I love that. Look at his little glasses. So yeah, one of the things that I deal with, of course, the Gen Z stare. I didn't put that into this list. Of course, that's been making a lot of waves here, 2025. So I try not to get into these kind of almost culture wars or intergenerational, kind of rock throwing. Is this a Gen Z phrase, or is it a baby boomer phrase, or a millennial phrase? But I think this idea of office frogs applies to everybody. It's maybe just new wine in old bottles, but this idea of people are staying in a job for a relatively short amount of time and then leaping. Well, what's wrong with that? We're being called a job hopper kind of thing. But I've worked with individuals where we've discussed a plan to stay at, let's say, a tech company for a relatively short time frame, 6 to 18 months, to become an expert at what they do, and then because there's typically no contract forcing them there or keeping them there, maybe consider a leap after that. So again, I come from the perspective where I work with folks one-on-one for their best interests. So if it's in your best interest to take a job and leave after a relatively short period of time, if that helps your career, and you're not bound to stay with that employer if it's a terminable at-will agreement, as it typically is, you can leave a job anytime. They can let you go at any time. So in a world where folks often have very little job safety and security, why not leap if that, in fact, gives your career a bump or a boost? So office frogging, I don't think quite has that negative connotation that job hopping does. Of course, that can come up in an interview, as in, why have you had 2, 3, 4, etc. roles in a 1, 2, 3, 4 year time frame? And I've met many hiring managers who have such radically different ideas of what job hopping looks like or smells like. But I think there's an interesting level to this concept here, where it's not necessarily negative, and you have some hiring managers actually who like to see that kind of zest in the career, where somebody maybe isn't afraid to leap into different tech firms. Let's say a little bit of time at Meta, a little bit of time at Google, a little bit of time at Microsoft or Apple, to see some different perspectives out there in the tech world. So I think this will be interesting to see if we actually hear this phrase more. among Gen Z or millennials or across the board. But again, it's a relatively newly coined, newly minted phrase or turn of phrase, what have you, and it involves a frog, so it makes the list. But very much, my whole point really is that words matter, and I've tried learning many other languages and failed pretty darn miserably for the most part and stumbled over the years. But we've got this English language that is such a hodgepodge, such a portmanteau language, such a mongrel language that, regardless of generation or industry or profession, these phrases actually might signal how people are feeling or trends. And I think it's worth trying to understand these phrases, whether they come from a psychiatrist or a psychologist or the kind of psychiatry realm or the HR realm or even the social media, TikTok, Instagram realm. That when folks take the time to coin a phrase, maybe we should listen to that. Maybe they're not just buzzwords. Real world challenges and our attempt at naming them with this flexible mongrel language we call English. So often these phrases have a root to them that maybe those of us in the career services realm should also listen to as well, and I'm putting myself right in that bucket. So good. I hope you found this interesting. I enjoyed putting this one together, and I may very well do another one. There are just so many interesting phrases that get coined every darn year. So if I miss some, or you think of some that, I know I missed a whole bunch, but if you think of some very obvious ones that maybe I missed, let me know. As usual, am I on target? Am I off base? Thank you for joining me. I very much appreciate it. And you'll see those citations there in the notes there here on YouTube as well. If you'd like to reach out, feel free. There's my email address. Those are my websites. Feel free to message me there on social media or direct through email. Thank you very much to all the wonderful music. So it keeps me calm and collected as I do these presentations. And thank you, everybody. I did put up a link. I'll put in a brief shout out for the Buy Me a Coffee folks, so I'll give that a try. So if you found this interesting or enlightening, I'll take a coffee, sure. But to all my clients, thank you. You're my lifeblood. You're the best. Supporters, thank you. Everybody on LinkedIn, especially my students. You, the viewers, thank you so much for putting up with my limited YouTube capabilities. And of course, thank you, Canva and Designer and all the wonderful tools that I use at Grammarly and everything else. So I hope your September has been great. Here's to an amazing October. Take care of yourselves. Thank you very much for joining me. All right. Bye-bye. Take care.